I stood in the hallway of the home I'd shared with James for 45 years. The heavy oak door of his study closed in my face. My daughter, Aurora, had just asked me to leave the room. "This is a family matter, Mom," she'd said, her voice firm, almost cold. "We'll let you know later." She had no idea I held the key to James's updated will, a secret he'd entrusted to me before his death. The sting of her words lingered as I stood surrounded by framed photographs documenting our life together. James and me at our wedding, Aurora's first steps, family vacations filled with laughter. Now, I felt like an intruder in my own home. Before I begin my story, I just want to show my gratitude by saying thank you for listening to me. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. It helps me more than you know and shows me do you appreciate what I do or not. Now, let me tell you what really happened. Aurora's words cut deeper as she stood in the doorway, blocking my entry. "Mom, we'll let you know afterwards," she repeated, her tone softer but no less dismissive. My own daughter, looking at me as if I were a stranger. "But I am family," I said, my voice barely audible. "James was my husband, Aurora." She sighed, a sharp, impatient sound I'd grown all too familiar with in recent months. "We need to discuss the estate without emotional complications. Richard has financial expertise, and we need to be practical." Behind her, I glimpsed Richard, my son-in-law, arranging papers on James's mahogany desk, papers about my life, my future, my home. My chest tightened. "Please, Mom," Aurora added, her voice artificially gentle. "We won't be long." I nodded, unable to find words as she closed the door. Standing alone, I felt small, insignificant, surrounded by memories of a life built with love and trust. It had been only 3 weeks since I watched them lower James into the ground. The wound was raw, the emptiness in our bed a nightly shock. And now this, excluded from decisions about the estate James and I had created together. I walked slowly to the kitchen, my sanctuary for decades, the tile floor James and I had installed in our 10th year of marriage still gleaming underfoot. The window garden, where my herbs thrived, seemed oblivious to the fact that James would never again praise my rosemary chicken. My hands trembled as I filled the kettle, the muffled sound of Aurora's voice rising with authority from the study. When had my shy little girl become this stranger, this woman who looked at me with calculation rather than love? As the water boiled, a memory surfaced. 6 months ago, James sat in this very kitchen, his face gaunt from cancer, but his eyes still sharp, still kind. "Debbie," he'd said, taking my hand across the table, "I've updated my will." I'd protested, unable to face the conversation. "James, please, I can't talk about this." He'd insisted gently, "You have to. Aurora has changed." I tried to defend her as mothers do. "She's just worried about you, about us." He shook his head. "It's more than that. Promise me you'll be ready. Promise me you'll be strong when the time comes." I'd promised, not understanding then what he meant. Now, alone in the kitchen, hearing Aurora and Richard planning my future without me, the weight of his warning settled fully on my shoulders. The kettle whistled, startling me back to the present. I poured water over a tea bag, watching the color bleed out, and thought of the safe deposit box Key James had pressed into my palm 2 weeks before he died. "Only after I'm gone," he'd whispered, "when you see who they really are." I hadn't gone to the bank yet. It felt too final, like accepting he was truly gone. But as I stood there, the decision crystallized. Tomorrow, I would see what James had left for me. The study door opened, and Aurora emerged, Richard close behind. Her face was flushed with triumph, his with satisfaction. "All done, Mom," she announced brightly. "We've worked out a plan that will take care of everything." "Everything?" I echoed, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "The house, the accounts, your care going forward," Richard explained with professional detachment. "You don't need to worry about a thing." I looked directly at Aurora. "James and I made decisions together about our estate. Shouldn't I be part of this conversation?" Her smile tightened. "Dad left us in charge of managing things, Mom. The paperwork is clear. You're still grieving. We don't want to burden you with details." She placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt more proprietary than comforting. I looked at her hand, then her face. This woman who had once been my tiny daughter, whom I'd nursed through fevers and heartbreaks, now treating me like a child who couldn't be trusted with adult matters. I see, I said quietly, though I was beginning to see far more than she realized. We'll handle everything, she repeated, squeezing my shoulder. Trust me, Mom. It's what Dad would have wanted. But as I watched them leave, copies of documents I hadn't been allowed to see tucked under their arms, I remembered James's face in those final days. His concern, his foresight, his quiet determination as he updated his will without Aurora's knowledge. Be ready, he told me, and I was starting to understand what he meant. Tomorrow, I would open that safe deposit box. Tomorrow, I would discover what James had really wanted. The next morning, I drove to the bank, the safe deposit box key heavy in my purse. The weight of James's warning, when you see who they really are, echoed in my mind, urging me forward. The bank manager, a kind woman who'd known James for years, led me to a private room. My hands trembled as I inserted the key, the lock clicking open with a finality that made my heart lurch. Inside the metal box lay a thick manila envelope, my name written in James's distinct handwriting, each letter a reminder of his careful, deliberate nature. I opened the envelope, handling it as if it might crumble under my touch. The first document was his updated will, notarized 6 months ago. As I read, my breath caught. James had left everything to me. The house, his investments, all of it. There was a provision for Aurora, a modest sum, but nothing like the control she'd implied she had. She told me I'd only get a small monthly allowance, I whispered to the empty room, my voice shaking with disbelief. Behind the will was a letter and a USB drive labeled "Watch this first." But what chilled me most was a third item, a folder containing bank statements, loan applications, and power of attorney documents, all bearing my signature, signatures I'd never written. I stared at the forged documents, my mind racing. Had Aurora been planning this for years? My own daughter? The realization settled like ice in my veins. I needed to see what was on that USB drive. Back home, the house was mercifully empty. Aurora had mentioned meeting a realtor, a comment that now carried sinister weight. I plugged the USB drive into James's computer, my fingers hesitating over the mouse. A single video file appeared. I clicked play, and James's face filled the screen. Thinner than I remembered, his jaw set with determination. Debbie, my love, he began, his voice pulling fresh tears from my eyes. If you're watching this, you've seen the will and the documents. I'm sorry to leave this burden to you, but you need to know the truth. He explained how, nearly a year ago, he discovered Aurora and Richard's plans. They'd been positioning themselves to control our assets after his death, discussing placing me in assisted living, not because I needed it, but to gain free reign over the house and our savings. I confronted Aurora, he continued, his eyes sad. She denied everything, claimed she was just organizing our finances. But I found the loan applications with your forged signature. They've borrowed nearly $200,000 in your name, Debbie. I gasped, memories flashing of Aurora's new car, the lavish renovations to their vacation home, expenses that had seemed excessive even on Richard's salary. James went on, his voice steady despite his frailty. I changed my will immediately. Everything goes to you, with provisions to protect you. The new will is filed with Walter Griffin, my attorney. He's expecting your call. The video ended, and I sat frozen, staring at his image, the last message he'd ever send me. The front door opened, jolting me from my trance. Mom, you home? Aurora called. I ejected the USB drive, slipping it into my pocket, and closed the computer. In the study, dear, I answered, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. She appeared in the doorway, her smile faltering as she saw me at James's desk. What are you doing in here? She asked, her tone sharp. Just remembering, I said. James spent so much time in this room. Her expression softened, but it was practiced, calculated. I know you miss him, but we need to start thinking about practical matters. She perched on the desk's edge, too close, her presence invasive. Richard and I were talking, and we think it might be time to consider selling the house. I wasn't surprised. Not after James's video, but the words still stung. Selling. I echoed. It's so big for just you, Mom, she said, her voice syrupy with concern. The maintenance, the stairs, we're worried about you living here alone. Where would I go? I asked, testing her. Her answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. There's a lovely retirement community near us. We've already looked into it. You'd have your own apartment, activities, people your age. Her hand covered mine, a gesture that once felt loving but now seemed manipulative. It would be so much better than rattling around this big house by yourself. I studied her face, searching for the little girl who'd once climbed into my lap for comfort, who'd drawn me pictures signed with wobbly hearts. When had she changed? When had money become more important than my happiness? I'm not ready to leave my home, I said simply. Aurora's smile tightened. Mom, we're not asking you to decide today. But the market's excellent right now, and Dad would want us to be practical. She stood, smoothing her expensive dress. Richard's meeting our financial advisor tomorrow. We should discuss your monthly expenses, ensure everything transitions smoothly. Transitions? I repeated. From Dad's management to ours, she clarified, as if explaining to a child. Don't worry. We'll make sure you're taken care of. After she left, I sat in James's chair, my fingers tracing the worn leather armrests. The evidence in my purse felt heavy, damning. My daughter had been planning to take everything, using my grief as a weapon, treating me as an inconvenience rather than a person to be loved. I reached for the phone and dialed Walter Griffin's number, the attorney James had trusted. As it rang, I glanced at the family photo on the desk. James, me, Aurora at her college graduation. So happy, so normal. Mr. Griffin's office, a voice answered. This is Debbie Reynolds, I said, my resolve strengthening. My husband James told me to call. I found his will and I need your help. The days after my call to Walter Griffin passed in a strange haze. I moved through the house like a spy, careful not to let Aurora or Richard suspect I knew their plans. Every phone call they made, every whispered conversation in corners now carried new meaning. Walter had confirmed James's account when I met him at his office. James came to me 8 months ago, deeply concerned, he explained, sliding a file across his desk. He discovered troubling financial activities and wanted to protect you. I clutched the folder, my fingers tracing the edges of the documents inside. What kind of activities? I asked, though I feared the answer. Walter's expression was grim. Unauthorized withdrawals, forged signatures on loan applications, and inquiries about your mental competency. James was thorough. He hired a private investigator to document everything. He opened the folder, revealing photographs, bank statements, and transcripts of recorded conversations, all in James's meticulous handwriting. I flipped through the images, each one a fresh wound. Aurora and Richard meeting realtors at coffee shops, touring retirement facilities, and most disturbingly, standing in our bedroom, taking inventory while I was at a doctor's appointment. This was during James's last hospital stay, I said, my voice hollow, pointing to a photo of them laughing over lunch with a woman I didn't recognize. The date stamp confirmed it, a day Aurora claimed she was swamped at work. That's Carla Matthews, Walter said, a geriatric care evaluator specializing in competency assessments for the elderly. The implication hit me like a physical blow. They were building a case to declare me incompetent. James suspected as much, Walter continued. That's why he insisted on a neurological evaluation and mental competency assessment before changing the will. He wanted to ensure they couldn't claim he wasn't of sound mind. Why didn't he confront them directly? I asked, closing the folder, unable to look at more evidence of my daughter's betrayal. Walter leaned back. He was protecting you. James knew if they realized he'd discovered their plans, they might accelerate their timeline or try something desperate. He wanted everything legally secured first. I nodded, the weight of James's foresight settling over me. He'd seen what I couldn't, what Aurora had become. I stopped at the cemetery on my way home. James's grave was still fresh. The flowers I'd brought last week wilted in the summer heat. I replaced them with roses, kneeling to speak to him. You knew her better than I did, I whispered. When did she change, James? Was it always there and I just didn't see it? The wind rustled the trees, offering no answers. Back home, an unexpected visitor waited on my porch. Robert, James's best friend of 30 years and Aurora's godfather, stood as I approached. "Debbie," he said, his voice warm but heavy. I heard what happened. I'd have come sooner, but I was out of the country. I invited him in, grateful for a familiar presence who'd known the real us. Over coffee in the kitchen, he admitted, "James told me some of it, not everything, but enough that I wasn't surprised when Walter called." "You knew?" I asked, a mix of relief and hurt rising. "Why didn't you tell me?" Robert's weathered face creased with regret. "James asked me not to. He said you wouldn't believe it unless you saw it yourself, that you'd defend Aurora until the evidence was undeniable." He was right. Even now, part of me wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. "There's something else," Robert said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "James gave this to me before he died. Said I'd know when to give it to you." Inside was a key and an address I didn't recognize. "What is this?" I asked. "A storage unit," Robert explained. "James rented it 6 months ago. Even I don't know what's inside. He said it was for your eyes only." The next day, I drove to the storage facility on the outskirts of town, a nondescript building of metal units. Unit 247 was at the back, away from the main office. My hand shook as I turned the key, the door creaking open to reveal shelves lined with boxes labeled in James's handwriting, financial records, Aurora's childhood, our wedding, family vacations. Most striking was a whiteboard on the far wall, covered in a timeline stretching back 5 years, documenting every suspicious request, every unexplained withdrawal, every attempt by Aurora and Richard to access our accounts. "Oh, James," I whispered, tracing his handwriting. In the center stood a desk with a laptop, a note taped to the screen. The place we got engaged plus the year we met. I smiled despite the pain. The North Point Lighthouse, 1970. Typical James, romantic even in his investigative work. The laptop powered on, revealing hundreds of files, scanned documents, spreadsheets tracking financial activities, emails between Aurora and Richard discussing their plans. One folder, labeled Evidence, contained recordings. I clicked one, and Aurora's voice filled the space. "She's so trusting, it'll be easy," she said. "We just need to move slowly, make her think it's her idea." Richard's laugh followed. "Your dad's the real problem. He watches those accounts like a hawk." "Not for much longer," Aurora replied, her voice cold. "The doctor said 3 months, maybe 6. We just need to be patient." I stopped the recording, feeling physically ill. They'd been waiting for James to die, counting the days, planning. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined. But James's thoroughness gave me strength. He'd left me everything I needed to protect myself. I returned home, the key and USB drive tucked safely in my purse, my resolve hardening. Aurora's family meeting to discuss my future was tomorrow. I'd be ready. The morning of Aurora's so-called family meeting dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with the promise of rain. I dressed carefully in a navy blouse and slacks, my movements deliberate, as if preparing for battle. The USB drive and copies of the forged documents sat in my purse, their weight a reminder of James's foresight. I touched the family photo on the desk, James, Aurora, and me, smiling at her college graduation, before heading to the kitchen to wait. From the window, I watched Aurora's sleek car pull into the driveway, followed by Richard's SUV. A third figure emerged, Bernard, their investment advisor, who always regarded me with thinly veiled impatience when I asked financial questions. "Mom," Aurora called, letting herself in with a key she'd copied without my permission. "We're here." I smoothed my cardigan, feeling the USB drive in my pocket for reassurance. "In the kitchen, dear," I replied, my voice steady. They filed in, Aurora leading with forced brightness, Richard checking his expensive watch, Bernard clutching a leather portfolio. The kitchen felt smaller, invaded. "Let's move to the dining room," Aurora suggested. "We have a lot to go over." I followed, noting how comfortably they directed affairs in my home. Aurora spread papers across the table before I sat, her movements brisk. "Mom," she began, her tone slipping into the patronizing cadence I now recognized, "we've worked everything out." After reviewing Dad's estate, we've determined a monthly allowance that will cover your basic needs. Richard slid a paper toward me. We've calculated $1,800 per month. That should be more than adequate for your lifestyle. I looked at the number, then at them. $1, $800 from your father's pension, and investments that generate over $12,000 monthly? Aurora's smile flickered. There are expenses, Mom. The house maintenance until we sell it, investment management fees. I kept my voice calm. And when were you planning to tell me about the loans you took out in my name? The room went still. Aurora's face drained of color, then flushed red. Richard's hand froze mid-reach for another document. What are you talking about? Aurora's voice lost its sweetness. I placed the copied loan documents on the table, 2 home equity loans, a personal loan, credit cards I'd never applied for, all with my forged signature. These, I said. Richard recovered first. Debbie, you're confused. You signed those during James's illness. Don't you remember the stress? Stop, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. I never signed these, and we both know it. Aurora leaned forward, dropping her pretense. Dad asked us to manage things. He knew you couldn't handle the financial details. Your father knew exactly what you were doing, I interrupted. He found out about the forgeries months ago. Their shock was palpable. But Aurora's face twisted not with remorse, but with anger at being caught. That's ridiculous, she sputtered. Dad trusted us too. To what, Aurora? I cut in. To put me in a home? To sell the house I've lived in for 40 years? To spend my retirement on your renovations and vacations? Bernard, looking uncomfortable, began gathering his papers. Perhaps I should leave you to discuss family matters. Stay, Richard commanded. This is just confusion. Grief can cause memory problems, paranoia even. He turned to me, his voice softening with false concern. Debbie, this is why we're worried about you living alone. I have the will, I said simply. Aurora's dismissive wave froze midair. What? James's actual will, I continued. Not whatever document you've been pretending exists. I turned to Bernard. Did they tell you they had power of attorney? That James left everything in their control. Bernard shifted, glancing between us. That was my understanding, yes. They lied, I said, producing a copy of the will Walter had given me. James left everything to me. Every account, property, and investment. Richard snatched the document, scanning it frantically. Aurora peered over his shoulder, her face contorting as she read. This can't be real, she whispered. Dad would never, he did, I said, after he discovered what you were doing. Aurora's shock morphed into something uglier. You turned him against me. After everything we've done for you. Done for me. I repeated, incredulous. You stole from me. You planned to sell my home and put me in a facility. You can't take care of yourself. Aurora shouted, her mask fully dropped. You're old, forgetful. You need supervision. Her words struck like blows, but I refused to flinch. I'm grieving, not incompetent. There's a difference. Richard placed a restraining hand on her arm. There must be some misunderstanding. Let's all calm down. The only misunderstanding, I said, standing, is that you thought I'd let you take everything James and I built together. Aurora hissed, her face twisted with rage. You'll regret this. You think you can manage without us? You'll be begging for our help within a month. I met her gaze, a profound sadness washing over me. The only thing I regret is that your father had to discover what you'd become. It broke his heart. She grabbed her purse, knocking over a chair. This isn't over. That will can be contested. Your mental capacity can be questioned. I held her stare. Try it. Walter has James's medical evaluations and evidence of your forgeries. Forgery is a criminal offense. The blood drained from Richard's face. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. They stormed out, threats hanging in the air. The house felt emptier yet more peaceful in their absence. I sat in James's study, the weight of the confrontation settling over me, but also a strange sense of liberation. The truth was out, and I was ready to fight for what was mine. The days following the confrontation were a blur of quiet resolve and lingering pain. I changed the locks on the house, a practical step that felt like severing a final tie to Aurora. Walter Griffin, James's attorney, agreed to handle all further communication with her and Richard, shielding me from their threats. You need to see something else, he said during our next meeting, sliding a thick folder across his desk. James was more thorough than I realized. Inside were photographs, additional bank statements, and transcripts of recorded conversations, all organized in James's precise handwriting. I stared, astonished. He hired a private investigator? Walter nodded. About 7 months ago, when Aurora started asking detailed questions about your finances, especially after insisting on being added to your accounts just in case. I flipped through images of Aurora and Richard meeting realtors, touring retirement facilities, and most chillingly, standing in our bedroom, cataloging possessions while I was at a doctor's appointment. One photo showed them laughing over lunch with the same woman from before, Carla Matthews, the geriatric care evaluator. The date stamp revealed it was taken during James's final hospital stay, when Aurora claimed she was too busy to visit. They were building a case against me, I said, the betrayal cutting deeper, to declare me incompetent. Walter's expression was grave. James thought so. That's why he got his own neurological evaluation, to ensure his will couldn't be challenged. Why didn't he tell me everything? I asked, closing the folder, the weight of Aurora's actions pressing against my chest. He was protecting you, Walter replied. He worried that confronting them directly might push them to act sooner, or worse. I nodded, James's foresight both a comfort and a reminder of his absence. Leaving Walter's office, I felt the need to connect with him again. I drove to the cemetery, where his grave lay under a canopy of oaks. Kneeling, I replaced the wilted roses with fresh ones. You saw it all, I whispered. How did I miss it, James? Back home, I found Robert on my porch, holding a bottle of wine and a sympathetic smile. I thought you might need company, he said. As Aurora's godfather and James's best friend, Robert had been a steady presence since the confrontation. Over glasses of Merlot in the kitchen, I shared what I'd learned. James left me everything I need to fight them, I said, gesturing to the folder. Robert's eyes softened. He always believed in your strength, Debbie, even when you doubted it. He hesitated, then pulled another envelope from his jacket. There's one more thing James left with me. He said to give it to you when you were ready to move forward. Inside was a letter in James's handwriting, dated a month before his death. Debbie, my love, it began, if you're reading this, you've faced the truth about Aurora. I'm sorry it came to this. I've left you one final gift, not money or property, but freedom. There's a place waiting for you, somewhere safe to start again. Robert will show you. Below was an address, different from the storage unit. What is this? I asked. Robert smiled faintly. A cabin James bought a year ago, near the lake where you two used to camp. He never told Aurora about it. He wanted you to have a place they couldn't touch. The next morning, Robert drove me to the lake, a 2-hour trip through rolling hills. The cabin was modest but charming, nestled among pines with a view of the water. Inside, I found touches of James, his favorite books on a shelf, a quilt we bought on our honeymoon draped over a chair. He planned this for you, Robert said. A sanctuary. Standing on the porch, I felt a flicker of peace, the first in months. But the calm was short-lived. My phone buzzed with a text from Aurora. We need to talk, Mom. This isn't over. My stomach tightened. I showed Robert, who frowned. They're not giving up easily. You need to be ready for their next move. Back home, I returned to the storage unit, determined to understand the full scope of James's preparations. The laptop revealed more files, emails between Aurora and Richard planning to contest the will, even discussing hiring a lawyer to question my mental capacity. One recording was particularly damning. Aurora's voice, cold and calculated. Once we get power of attorney, we can sell the house and move her to Sunny Pines. It's perfect. She won't need much space. Richard's voice followed, and we clear our debts with her money. By summer, we're free. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking. They'd been plotting while James was dying, counting on my grief to make me compliant. I called Walter that evening, sharing the new evidence. This strengthens your position, he said. If they try to contest the will, these recordings are admissible, thanks to James's investigator. Forgery and fraud could lead to criminal charges. His words bolstered my resolve, but the thought of legal battles with my daughter was a fresh wound. Still, I couldn't let them take everything James and I had built. The official reading was days away, and I knew Aurora and Richard would come prepared with their own strategy. I had to be ready, too. The morning of the official reading, I arrived at Walter Griffin's office early, dressed in the blue suit James always loved, my hair neatly styled. No more cardigans or house slippers. I was done being the grieving, confused widow Aurora expected. "You look formidable," Walter said with approval as I settled in the conference room. "I feel formidable," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. Robert arrived next, squeezing my shoulder before taking the seat beside me, his presence a quiet anchor. At precisely 9:58, Aurora and Richard swept in, followed by Bernard, their financial advisor, who looked distinctly uneasy. Aurora had dressed as the grieving daughter in tasteful black, but her eyes burned with cold determination. Richard nodded stiffly in my direction, his expression calculating. "Mom," Aurora said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "you're looking better." I smiled, noting her slight falter at my calm demeanor. Richard whispered something to her, and she straightened, as if steeling herself for a fight. They thought they still had cards to play. Walter cleared his throat as the clock struck 10. "Thank you all for coming. We're here for the official reading of James Reynolds's last will and testament." He began with the formal legal language, and I watched Aurora and Richard closely. They were tense but confident, exchanging subtle glances. Before proceeding to the distribution of assets, Walter continued. "Mr. Reynolds included a letter to be read at this time, to be read in its entirety." Aurora shifted impatiently. "Is this necessary? We're familiar with Dad's sentiments." Walter ignored her, breaking the envelope's seal. "To my family," he read. "If you're hearing this, I've passed on, but my love and concern remain. I've valued honesty, integrity, and family loyalty above all. Recently, I've reflected on how these values have been honored or dishonored within our family. I've uncovered plans made behind my back, deception and betrayal from those I trusted most." Aurora's face drained of color. Richard gripped her hand under the table. Walter continued. "I've documented evidence of financial exploitation, forged signatures, and a coordinated effort to control my estate and isolate my beloved wife, Debbie, after my death." Aurora interrupted, her voice shrill. "This is ridiculous." Dad was confused at the end, medications. Walter's tone was firm. "Ms. Reynolds, I'm required to read this in full." James's letter detailed his discoveries. Secret meetings, forged documents, retirement facility tours taken while I was at doctor's appointments. With each revelation, Aurora shrank, her confident facade crumbling. "Therefore," Walter read, reaching the final paragraph, "I've made provisions to protect Debbie, not out of malice, but out of love for my wife of 45 years, and, yes, even for my daughter, who I hope will one day remember the values we instilled in her." Silence fell. Aurora's hands trembled. Richard stared at the table, jaw clenched. "Now to the will itself," Walter said, setting the letter aside. The provisions matched what I'd seen in the safe deposit box. The house, investments, and savings were mine, with strict clauses preventing contests. Aurora's inheritance was modest, delayed 10 years, and contingent on no legal conflicts with me. "This is insane," Richard exploded. "You can't expect us to accept this." "It doesn't matter if you accept it," Walter replied calmly. "This is a legally binding document witnessed and notarized with Mr. Reynolds' mental competency documented." Aurora turned to me, tears streaming down her face, a performance that might have swayed me weeks ago. "Mom, you know Dad wasn't thinking clearly. We were only trying to ensure you were taken care of. By forging my signature on loans?" I asked quietly. "By planning to sell my home while I still lived in it?" "You don't understand," she insisted. "It was for your own good." I reached into my purse and pulled out the small recorder James had left me. "I think we understand perfectly." I pressed play, and Aurora's voice filled the room. "Once Dad's gone, we move quickly. Get her to sign over power of attorney while she's emotional. If she resists, we document every slip up until we have enough to force the issue." Richard's voice followed. And the house on the market by summer. We use Mom's money to clear our debts, then move her to Sunny Pines. I stopped the recording. Aurora's face was ashen. There's more, I said softly. Hours more. James was thorough. Richard sputtered. You recorded us? That's illegal. Walter interjected. James used a licensed investigator. It's all admissible. Aurora stood, her chair scraping. You planned this ambush, both of you. You turned out against me. I met her gaze, anger and grief warring within me. No, Aurora. You did this yourself. She grabbed her purse, tears still streaming. You'll regret this. You need us. As she stormed toward the door, Richard trailing, I called after her, Aurora. She paused, not turning. James wanted me to tell you something. He said, it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Her shoulders stiffened, perhaps trembling, before she vanished, the door slamming behind her. Bernard cleared his throat. Mrs. Reynolds, I had no idea about any of this. They told me you'd agreed to their management. I nodded, unsure if I believed him. As the meeting ended, Robert stayed. Are you all right? He asked. I considered the question. My husband was gone, my daughter a stranger. Yet the truth was out. No, I said honestly, but I will be. 6 months had passed since the will reading, the seasons shifting from summer to autumn, then winter, and now the tentative buds of spring dotted my garden. I knelt in the soft earth, planting tulip bulbs along the border, James, and I had always planned for, but never completed. The act felt like a promise to him, to myself, a way to move forward while carrying his memory. Those will look beautiful come April, a voice said behind me. Robert stood at the garden gate, holding a bag from our favorite bakery. Almond croissants? I asked, peeling off my gardening gloves. You pretend not to love them, he teased. But today feels like a sometimes day. We settled at the patio table, the air crisp, the sun warm. I'd made changes to the house. Light curtains replaced heavy drapes, the dining room now my art studio where I'd resumed painting. The space was mine, not erasing James, but reflecting my new beginning. Have you heard from her? Robert asked carefully, pouring coffee. Aurora sent a Christmas card, I said. Formal, signed by both of them. He nodded, not pressing. The estrangement hurt, despite everything. A mother's love doesn't vanish, even when wounded. I'd heard through friends that Aurora and Richard had moved to Phoenix, Richard taking a new job. The distance was a relief, giving space to process. I've been thinking about the trip, I said, shifting topics. James and I always dreamed of Italy, Rome, Venice the art. I've booked flights for the Amalfi Coast in June. Robert's face brightened. That's wonderful, Debbie. I hesitated, then added, I'd like you to come with me as a friend. James always said you were the best travel companion. A mix of emotions crossed his face. Pleasure, hesitation. I'd be honored, he said finally. We sat in silence, watching cardinals flit among the trees. Grief, I'd learned, wasn't linear. It surged at unexpected moments, a coffee mug, James's jacket, but I was learning to live alongside it. The doorbell rang, startling me. Expecting someone? Robert asked. I shook my head, approaching the door. Through the frosted glass, I saw a slender female figure, and my heart quickened, thinking of Aurora. But it was a young woman, early 20s, shifting nervously. Mrs. Reynolds, she asked. I'm Lily Chun, a student at the community college. Professor Walker said you might talk to me about your memoir project. I smiled, recognizing my writing instructor's name. Come in, Lily. Coffee and croissants. We settled in the living room, her notebook ready. Professor Walker said your story is remarkable, she began. Losing your husband, the family difficulties. Would you share more? 6 months ago, I might have deflected, but James had taught me the value of truth. It started with a family meeting I wasn't allowed to attend. I began recounting the betrayal, the will, the confrontation. 2 hours later, Lily paused at the door, her notebook full. Can I ask something personal? Are you hoping to reconcile with your daughter? The question pierced me. I thought of Aurora's card, distant yet present, and the photo of her beside my bed. I've learned to live with uncertainty, I said. I hope so, but my life doesn't depend on it. Lily nodded. My mother and I haven't spoken in 3 years. Sometimes I think too much has happened. I touched her arm. The door can stay open without letting people walk over you. James taught me that. After she left, Robert, who'd given us privacy, rejoined me in the garden. You told her everything, he asked, surprised. Most of it, I said, picking up my trowel. She's writing about resilience. I have something to offer. He smiled. James would be proud, not just for standing up, but for moving forward. That evening, in my study, James's Study No More, I opened my laptop. My memoir, The Last Legacy, was taking shape, not about money, but the truth James gave me, the chance to reclaim my life. An email notification appeared, aurora_reynolds@gmail.com. My heart skipped. The message was brief. Mom, I've been thinking. Richard and I are separating. I've started therapy. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to call sometime, if that's okay. Hope, caution, and love surged through me. Outside, the garden lay in twilight, bulbs waiting to bloom. I typed my reply. I'd like that very much. Your father always said it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. I believe that's true for us all. I pressed send, then returned to my writing. Tomorrow would bring what it would. For now, it was enough to know James's wisdom still guided us, his final legacy lighting the way forward.